The following is excerpt from the dissertation written by Dr. Janine Villalobos, and I quote, "It might surprise readers that I rely heavily on Fernández Baltasar Cué's El Verdadero Rudolfo Valentino, an obscure series of 10 articles that was written in Spanish and published by the all-but-forgotten Mexican periodical Cine Mundial. However, my great-grandfather, Alberto Guglielmi Valentino, really did believe the articles represented the true Rudolph Valentino. According to Alberto, Valentino had met Cué through the actor's good friend Manuel Ricci. The three Latin men felt a bond, particularly as Valentino felt increasingly embattled by the press. Alberto said that Cué was a house guest at Falcon Lair in 1926, and that Rudy was cooperating on the series just before his death, giving Cué access to many personal documents and photographs, some of them which are reproduced in the articles. In long California afternoons, Valentino, Manuel Ricci, and Douglas Gerard, another close friend of the star, shared their reminiscences with Cué. After Valentino's death, Ricci, Gerard, and Alberto Valentino continued to assist Cué. The articles that resulted from this collaboration are remarkable, offering stories and photographs that had never been published elsewhere. Subsequently, much of Cué's information has been substantiated, and my documents verify even more, which leads me to place a high degree of confidence in Cué's claims. My great-grandfather hoped that these series of articles would stand as the definitive biography of Rudolph Valentino. The irony, of course, is that because of the articles' obscurity and the lost story of their origins, no biographer has ever used them." End quote.
Ciao! I am Renato Floris, the translator of our new book, The True Rudolph Valentino by Baltasar Fernández Cué. The book which Dr. Villalobos spoke so very highly of in her dissertation, which Evelyn just accepted. As she said, the book had the full endorsement of her great-grandfather Alberto, and this was the book Valentino was working on when he died, and which, until now, has only been available in Spanish. I am very proud not only to publish this great book, but to have worked to make it available as a publisher on Amazon and as translator in English. My translation of this book is not 100% endorsement of everything Cué writes, but because I feel, as does Dr. Villalobos, that Cué's book is an important document to share. And yes, I am also the very proud publisher of all the scholarly and entertaining and well-documented books on Rudolph Valentino and Natasha Rambova by Evelyn Zumaya. And I'm here today with Evelyn to discuss more about her fascinating work. Ciao, Evelyn.
Ciao, Renato. It is, as always, great to be here with you on this spring day. In our previous episode, we titled Rudy, Cué, and More, we launched the book you just translated, The True Rudolph Valentino by Baltasar Cué, and which Miss Villalobos so thoroughly endorsed. And we explained how Valentino's motive for beginning this book, back in 1926, was his fury over the hateful attacks targeting him in the press, and the abusive fictionalization of his life story, and his being called effeminate. In this he felt victimized, and he was sadly, during what turned out to be the very end of his short life, just determined to take action about this, to deal with it head on. Now this new book, which he began with Cué, was his response to those hateful and false attacks. As you just mentioned, he died before it could be finished. And I encourage listeners who have not already done so to listen to the previous episode to hear all about this fascinating book. So today I begin by reading an excerpt from the book where Cué makes an interesting revelation about Rudolph Valentino. And I will read from his book, your translation, on page 23. And I quote, Rudolph opened a drawer in his desk and handed me some useful documents, including a letter, a portrait, a newspaper clipping, and a copy of an otherworldly message. One day he called his secretary and told her to give me the only copy he had of the story of his life, published years before in one of the most important film magazines in the United States. Miss Margaret Neff gave it to me accompanied by other similar documents. Rudolph recommended them to me as if they were precious jewels or some ancient parchments, which could not be replaced in any way. He made a huge qualification about the quality of the content of one of those documents. He wanted to be sure to emphasize to me that this was a story reputed to be his autobiography titled My Life Story, end quote. So Valentino had a drawer of hate pieces written about himself. Cué does not call the authors of these hit pieces haters, but in the days obviously long before the internet, this type of bullying of an individual appeared not as they do today as mile-long, sadistic, violently delusional and petty blog posts, but articles and editorials in national and local publications. Yet they were full of the same type of false allegations about Valentino's life story and often about his trusted inner circle. Now, those articles and documents in Valentino's desk drawer were the same type of false narrative we see today, which is being churned out so feverishly about Valentino's close friend and trusted business manager, George Ullman, and about his godfather, Frank Manillo. I mention these two men in particular today for reasons which will promptly be evident here.
I found it tragic to read how Valentino kept these disturbing articles, and that he felt the need to write this book in order to tell his truth and respond as best he could in that day. What would he be saying now with the hit pieces appearing online about his friends and business associates? He would be really disgusted, I think.
I think it is interesting, Renato, to read how Valentino was so disturbed by the hateful hit pieces about him that he kept them in his desk drawer. Yes, I really do. Now, this certainly reveals he was not ignoring the situation, and that he knew there was an obvious and irrational hatred being directed towards him. But in this episode today, I will continue to expose the hate mongers plaguing Valentino's legacy. Those people who are still engaging in this abusive fictionalization of Valentino today. Those who are still spewing out hit pieces in his name based on unsupported innuendo, and in this way generating even more of the same material which Valentino so opposed and lamented during the last few months of his life. We have discussed this in previous episodes and mentioned these people, the team as they have called themselves, those who have done all they can and still do to spread false information about George Ullman and Frank Manillo and about us as we share our Valentino discoveries. It may be hard for some people to believe this, but these people do work as a syndicate, together, to ruin our reputations with outright lies. And I just have to ask before I begin here today, what kind of insanity is it that we have to come under such barbaric attacks for so long just for publishing a few books on Rudolph Valentino? But this is the exact situation. Now, the reasons for this team's destructive actions over the past decade have also been addressed in previous episodes, so I will not belabor the sordid history today. The team, the cabal, the Valentino cult, the syndicate, they've been attacking us for many years, a decade of our lives, and counting. Now, this fanatical element in the Valentino world has been talked about and even written about as far back as the Star's death, and mentioned by Valentino biographer Irving Shulman, who referred to them as a cult in 1965. So every time we launch a new book, they light up their torches and go howling into the street to alert the townsfolk in Valentinoville that we have a new book out. And of course, this is what they did this past week, after we announced our publication of Baltasar Cué's The True Rudolph Valentino. Before I respond to these haters' latest contributions to the body of hate speech executed in Valentino's name, I'm going to read a definition of the word hater, because I feel it lends insight into what we are talking about today. Now, a hater is defined on the Urban Dictionary as, and I quote, a person that simply cannot be happy for another person's success. So rather than be happy, they make a point of exposing a flaw in that person. The result of being a hater is not exactly jealousy. These people don't really want to be the person he or she hates. Rather, the hater wants to knock someone else down a notch. End quote. So we launched the True Rudolph Valentino this past Monday. And before a single book had time to be delivered, the hateful hit pieces were posted online. And in direct response to our publishing Cué's fascinating book, which was born out of Valentino's intense fury at just such hit pieces, the past few days, it has been instant, and I will add, really sloppy hate from the haters. They wasted no time in letting the world know how vicious they are, how mean-spirited, how spiteful, and their responses spoke loud and clear as to their tragic mental states, their obvious and total disinterest in the new Rudolph Valentino discoveries, and a 100% lack of respect and appreciation for your incredible effort, Renato, translating this book. And I am very grateful to you for all the hard work you did to make this important book by Cué available to an English-speaking audience. I saw how much time it took you and how much attention you paid to ensuring it be the best possible translation. Thank you. And I add that the response has been incredible from many, many wonderful people sharing their excitement over this new book, and I'm very happy for that. But as a result of our announcing this book this past week, Rudolph Valentino's legacy and memory is being severely victimized in an even heavier way by those who are, in my expert opinion, the most aggressive and very worst haters Rudolph Valentino has ever had. Today I respond to those hate-mongering Valentino know-it-alls who behave openly as bullies, and to their new hate blog, and I respond to their new hate blog appearing last week, which is run by the new kid on the hater blog, one Simon Constable. I will begin today by responding to Simon Constable. I know he would snigger in delight if I were to rave and rant here angrily, and prove to him that he succeeded in wounding me. He did not. And if his attempts were not so pitiful and vicious and wrong, they would be hilarious, but he's anything but funny. And his crass and abusive fictionalizing, I guess you could also call it a complete fictional distortion, of Valentino's history, as well as the history of those he respected and loved most, specifically his dear friend and manager S. George Ullman, and his godfather Frank Manillo, it will not be allowed to stand without my defense of these two honorable and fine men in Valentino's life. Two men I had the honor to have been the first and only Valentino biographer to interview their families and bring their colorful stories to light. As a reward for Constable's most recent efforts in tearing down my research on Valentino's godfather Frank Manillo, through his use of unsupported innuendo and personal opinion, he is being heavily promoted by his hate-mongering cohorts as they link to his hate blog with all their gory promotion. And the other designated hate blog is run by Tracy Terhune, MC of the annual Death Fest held before Valentino's final resting place and a Valentino collector. Well, he has reposted Constable's piece and promises ominously that there will be more. Now, the other hater chirping in on Terhune's blog is David Brutt, Valentino porn fiction writer, also currently known online as Albert Morris, which I believe he originally had. I do remember him calling himself Alberto Morris. So, Constable's Manifesto has been issued just after we launched our new book, by the way, and in the same vein as all previous hater hit pieces, and pretty much a flawless definition of hater behavior in his choosing small, insignificant things and blowing them up into a huge, absurd innuendo in an attempt to knock someone down, to ruin a person's online search and lie about who they really were, to create a false version of who they were through opinion slathered in random documents which you can find easily online, and the spreading of implication of wrongdoing, which is not supported by any documentation. So Simon Constable posts a 5-mile-long snide piece on Frank Manillo, claiming he has found proof he was not who I claim he was in Affairs Valentino. This piece, which he titled Frank, is a definitive statement of how hate is the one emotion you can never hide. Reading it, one can almost taste Constable's spite in every line. Despite Constable's glee, his motivation makes him no scholar, no keen researcher, as Terhune refers to him, as he reveals nothing in the way of new documentation, omits an enormous part of Frank Manillo's story purposely, and as it is an opinion-ridden hit piece on Frank Manillo, which at every turn he states his conclusions as nothing more than innuendo. Now, it is not a bad thing, I think, to follow a lead or to investigate a theory, but Constable's conspiratorial hysteria is so far from the reality of the documents I uncovered that his individual points scarcely merit mention. But I will address some of the issues he twists to fit his nefarious agenda. And I add that when a piece is written laden with conclusions in lines such as, in my opinion, or this certainly implies, it is absolutely worthless historically. As Constable is so hell-bent on proving his muscle as a researcher this week, I will say a bit about how I came to write the story of Frank Manillo and my process as far as the creation of Affairs Valentino, because I took a few years to research and write this story of Frank Manillo. And yes, I located and interviewed his family for a period of almost 2 years as they worked with me, answering my many questions, providing me with materials, and reading what I wrote to ensure accuracy. I vetted what they shared with me, and if I had no source, I cited it in the book to family interviews. So, Simon Constable, I know Frank Manillo's family, as well as the Ullman family, whom I also worked with. These people welcomed me into their homes and had their archives and photos waiting for me with all pride. They were all intelligent, honest, and very classy folks who were eager to talk about their relative. In both cases, these families were there to honor Frank Manillo and George Ullman with their honesty and remarkable candor. I wrote their stories, and yes, I did report how Frank Manillo made and lost $1 million several times over during his 50 years of life. And I reported on his rocky marriage with Zelinda. The Godfather's family told me so many memories as passed down by Frank's son, Arnold. And yes, some treasured ones about Rudolph Valentino, which I include in Affairs Valentino. And I learned a great deal about his business and about his early death. I reported how Frank was at times so poor. At one point, while he and his son Arnold were running their California tomato juice factory in Merced, California, in the beautiful San Joaquin Valley, they would take a loaf of bread and visit their tomato farmers to, and I quote, taste the crop. But being broke, owing money, or recovering financially from any setback is not fodder to impugn someone's reputation. Nothing has changed in my story of Frank, nothing. And the only thing that changes Frank Manillo's story now, and which I am seriously responding to today, is the obvious and snarky, false, innuendo-laden hit piece posted by Simon Constable, which lays claim to all kinds of absurdities with no sourcing and is delivered with the obvious intention to pollute this man's legacy and bully him with lies. Frank was an honorable gentleman, a respected colleague of 2 U.S. presidents, Coolidge and Harding. And among much else, he earned a respected nomination as the head of the Italian-American League. He invented machinery used in the cannery process and owned the American Olive Company and many other businesses both on the East and West Coast. These are hardly minor life achievements. I began my search for Frank Manillo's family because I was then researching those court records I discovered. Those court records at last revealing the truth about the long and treacherous story of the settlement of Rudolph Valentino's estate. Frank Manillo was mentioned a lot in those documents, and I wondered if there was anything his family could add to my very specific story. As an aside here, I want to mention, Renato, that I did write Frank Manillo's authorized story, which I title Rudolph Valentino and the Olive King. And the link to this is on the rudolphvalentino.org website under the Frank Manillo tab. Now, I wrote Frank's story after years of research, and as I just mentioned, I worked with his family, just as I worked with the family of George Ullman. And I was very humbled to hear the first accounts of both of these great men's stories who stood together at Rudolph Valentino's bedside when he died. Valentino would die in Frank Manillo's arms. I took the fact that I was the first biographer to tell their stories most seriously. I still do, and that is why I am here today. Simon Constable sets out with a little spread of ship manifest records and some news items he found in an attempt to prove Frank Manillo was a criminal, a wife-beater, a bad businessman, and whatever. And he writes a glossy, biased, and hateful hit piece impugning this important and colorful character in Valentino's life story. Constable's sensational and undocumented conspiracy theory conclusions border on the ridiculous. I explain. Regarding the loan which Ullman made to Frank for his California Tomato Juice Company, or VAB, this is a complex story which I tell in its entirety in Affairs Valentino. The financial history of this loan, and the business and its failure, was heavily scrutinized by the court, and despite the originals of those records being stolen and passed about between collectors, I have official copies of them as filed with the California Court of Appeals. And I can say with authority that Simon Constable and Tracy Terhune have little knowledge of the workings of those transactions. Constable misrepresents this absurdly by attempting to attribute Ullman investing in Manillo's business to the false belief that Rudolph Valentino died of poisoning, that Manillo was blackmailing Ullman, and this is how the loan happened. False. I think most people have read the medical reports of Valentino's doctors and know that even the nurses attending him were interviewed by the press. The insane belief that everyone was willing to sacrifice their careers to act in some unified and clandestine cover-up because Valentino was poisoned is completely not supported by documentation and exists only as supposition and innuendo. These were reputable doctors and nurses who were not about to lie, as they had no reason to. Now, Constable claims that Frank was blackmailing Ullman to get that loan, and that the two men, and I quote, Tracy Terhune, took advantage of Valentino's sister Maria Strada to get permission for that loan, and that a few days after she wrote the letter of permission or recommendation of Frank Manillo, George Ullman wrote a check to Frank Manillo for $40,000 as an investment in his canning business. Now, this is false, and I will explain. And what Tracy Terhune fails to report is that this loan was deemed a legitimate business loss, and any liability was dismissed by the appeals court ruling. He makes it sound as if two evil men made Maria Strada responsible to pay that loan. And this Terhune gives a very deceptive account. So I will explain this to Terhune so he can cease spreading these lies and innuendo. George Ullman did not hand Frank Manillo $40,000 within days of Maria's letter being signed, which was dated December 1st, 1927. I have a copy of that letter here, as it was included as Executor's Exhibit 4 in the case file I recovered. And I read the letter. It is, as I said, it was dated December 1st, 1927. Dear Mr. Ullman, our friend, Mr. Frank Manillo, is coming to Los Angeles, and I am sure that his intervention will take out many difficulties. As it is natural that his expenses shall not be supported by him, I would be very grateful to you if you would give him directly on account of me how much he asks you for. Thanking you in anticipation that you will agree, my best regards, Maria Guglielmi Strada. Now, the first check George Ullman issued to Frank Manillo was on December 28, 1927, and it was for $500 for Frank's expenses, as he was there on Maria's behalf. The VAB loan, the cannery loan, was negotiated over the period of the next year, with 6 checks being issued. Ullman made this loan to Frank Manillo as a secured loan and fully believed this to be a sound investment of Valentino's estate funds. No one imagined that it was what was about to happen with the intervention of A.P. Giannini and the fall of the U.S. stock market in October of 1929. George Ullman testifies that he advanced funds to Frank Manillo based upon Maria's letter, as he believed Frank Manillo was acting on her behalf in Los Angeles. And I cite the court records, George Ullman's testimony on page 206 from his appeals court case and the reporter's transcripts files. I excerpt first George Ullman being questioned directly by his attorney. The question to him is, Mr. Ullman, I will now show you 13 checks. The first one bearing the date of December 28, 1927, and the last one bearing the date of June 15, 1929, in the following amounts: $500, $500, etc. And ask you if that correctly represents the amount of money which was paid by you to Frank Manillo. George answers, yes. Question, all right, why did you pay this money to Frank Manillo? George answers, he showed me the letter that Maria had given to him under the conditions of which he was supposed to have all of his expenses paid. The larger check, which I gave him, was supposed to be used, and a part of it was used, as I understand it was, for the development of a mausoleum plan. Question, did Executor's Exhibit Number 4, this is Maria's letter, have anything to do with your giving this money to Manillo? Answer, yes, that was the reason. End quote. And I quote a second bit of the same testimony where the attorney asked George, state, Mr. Ullman, why you made these loans to Mr. Frank Manillo in the manner that you did. He answers, there were several elements that entered into my loaning Frank Manillo this money. In the first place, I relied a great deal upon the knowledge I had of his previous friendship for Valentino. In the second place, I thought that the business venture was extremely good, that it would turn out to be a profitable one, which I still think it will. In the third place, I always presumed that I was conducting the corporation, and therefore I had the power to loan out funds that had accumulated. I wanted to make money for the corporation so that I could make pictures. In the fourth place, I relied a great deal upon the representations of the fact that he was here in Maria's stead. I believed that he was. He had a power of attorney. At least I was told so. End quote. And before moving on here, Renato, I read a little more testimony from George Ullman's lawyer as he asked the court to accept an exhibit, which is not included in the file that I recovered, but this little piece reveals an interesting point about the generosity of Frank Manillo to Rudolph Valentino. This is from page 122 in the same file. Attorney Wilson addresses the judge. Your Honor, I'm going to now offer, after showing it to counsel, I'm going to offer in evidence something which I confess I believe is improper, unless counsel will be generous enough to permit it to be received. But it does show the relationship that existed between Mr. Manillo and Mr. Valentino. The judge says, well, didn't you cover that enough when the statement was made and unchallenged that they were long-standing, intimate friends? Mr. Wilson answers, this goes further than that, further than the ordinary friend. It is a voluntary offer from Mr. Manillo to lend Valentino some money. End quote. My last excerpt on this subject from Affairs Valentino, page 150, and I quote, George was then summoned back to the witness stand, reminded that he was still under oath, and asked for more details about the meeting in question. Who all was present? Nobody was there but Lou Mahoney, Maria Strada, and I. State what was said in reference to Frank Manillo. Maria Strada told me at the time that she met Frank Manillo in New York. He had taken her to an attorney whose name was William Grossman, that she wanted Frank Manillo to come here and represent her interests, whatever they may be in the estate. She stated she had implicit faith in Manillo and that he would be here at her expense, and that I was to give him whatever he may ask for in connection with her share of the estate. End quote. So Simon Constable, this was 1928 and the end of 1929, a time when the stock market crashed, banks failed, and when Manillo faced tremendous business obstacles, including his first ruination by banker A.P. Giannini. who did not get a mention in Constable's grandiose manifesto on Frank. After interviewing the family and constructing Frank Manilo's story, I wrote it into Affairs Valentino. And in rereading it, preparing for this episode, I stand by my account 100%. And I say that Ullman acted in good faith, and both he and Frank Manilo had every confidence that this would be a source of income for the Valentino estate. Fate proved otherwise, as it did for many Americans at that time. I think Terhune and Constable used these business failures to imply these men were devious. This is just innuendo. And what is so bad about this is that they are deterring people from reading the true stories of these fascinating men's lives and involvement in Rudolph Valentino's life and death. I'm going to say, as a side note here to Simon Constable, just to lend some insight into my research in this story. Trolling Ancestry.com and ship registries is a part of it. It's a useful tool, but I spent 10 years researching and writing Affairs Valentino. I traveled, I interviewed, I rented cars, I tromped through airports, and I spent hundreds of hours analyzing court records and piecing together a story that was long forgotten, and which had been erased by the theft of those records, and by a malicious and hateful cover-up of the truth about Ullman and Manilo. I wrote and wrote, and I had many intelligent and helpful people read the early versions of Affairs Valentino, and they gave me great and helpful input and edits, such as Michael Morris, Sam Fleischman, and even I was honored to have Kevin Brownlow read an early version. As far as Frank Manilo's story goes, it was, as I said, a very complicated one. And Simon Constable's frantically contrived piece, in which he tries to boil it all down to his theory of who he wants Frank to be, his snide insinuations about Frank Manilo's motives, with no documentation to those at all. In the process, he excludes so very, very much. I cite the following. Constable fails to mention the entire relationship between A.P. Giannini, the banker, and head of the Bank of Italy, which became the Bank of America, and Frank Manilo. He fails to mention how Giannini ruined Frank Manilo, and then Giannini's bank became Rudolph Valentino's executor after George Ullman voluntarily resigned. Now, Constable slathers more innuendo on Frank Manilo by alleging he beat his wife. Quote, physical violence is implied. Just so he knows, Frank Manilo and his estranged wife, Zelinda, were friends their entire lives, parenting their son Arnold. I interviewed Arnold's son at length, and he knew a great deal about his grandmother Zelinda and his grandfather Frank's lives. I personally think he would know more than Simon Constable. And I have to mention, Renato, before I move on here, in regards to those photographs Simon Constable used to illustrate his undocumented takedown of the godfather Frank Manilo, they were used 100% illegally and without permission. They are protected by the sole ownership of the Frank Manilo family, and their copyright protection is restated under the copyright of Affairs Valentino. So, how hypocritical of Simon Constable to be trying so very hard to hang a man unable to defend himself by accusing him of illegal activity and underhanded behavior, while he, Simon Constable, is blatantly breaking the law by using images Frank Manilo's family entrusted to me to use solely in Affairs Valentino. So I ask him to remove those images, which are the first portrait of Frank, the one of him on the White House lawn, and the one where Frank is standing in front of the tomato juice factory in Merced with his brother Chiro. And if he does not remove these copyrighted images, I will be filing a DMCA form, that's the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, to WordPress to have them removed. And as you know, it was not long ago that Simon Constable pinched some other photographs, some of my research discoveries, that he tried to pass off as his own. It was brought to my attention that he posted pages from my book, Astral Affairs Rambova, images that again he had no permission to use at all, and was presenting my discovery of the lost movie Who Am I, in which Natasha Rambova appeared, as something he found. There was zero attribution to my work, or that this was even in my book.
The people who gave you these stories, the Frank Manillo and George Ullman families, they were not so removed in time from Rudolph Valentino's life.
No, they were not, Renato. Bob Ullman was technically on the Mineral Lavator in utero, but still, he was Valentino's godson. I interviewed Bob on his deathbed, and he was emphatic I not write a word about his father's tenure as executor of the Valentino estate without the court records to prove my statements. It was a tough task to find those documents, as his health was failing so fast and I had to hurry. It took me 1 year of work before I finally located those records. And then I learned that George Ullman was 100% exonerated on all charges. And I share this today to demonstrate the quality of people who were George Ullman's children and were also Frank Manillo's family. They were so happy, too, to share the stories that Frank's son Arnold told them. And Arnold knew Rudolph Valentino well. Valentino taught Arnold to dance the tango. So why now, Simon Constable? Why have you just now filed your blog post on Frank? I think Tracy Terhune sure gave us the answer to that when he posted in bold red letters the following, and I quote, "Read the wonderful debunking of Zumaya's Manillo theory by Simon at the His Fame Still Lives blog. Click on this, Frank," end quote. Now I add that Terhune posted this on the blog he runs under my book's title. This blog, which he has run to bully me and us for how many years now, Renato? 7 years. That URL under Affairs Valentino. That blog, which was mine for a few years until I closed it one night when David Brett threatened to open hate blogs about other members of my family. Now, I did not realize then that I could have just taken the blog offline, but I panicked, I think as would anyone. It was then Terhune sensed advantage in his Destroy Evelyn Zumaya campaign, and to my horror, he opened it. Oh, at first he claimed he was going to use it for the good, and I still wonder how that could be remotely true, as in using it at all, he was deceiving web traffic and people seeking information about my work, letting them think it was my blog, where he posted headlines such as, "My book is pure fiction." And then he ran bylines for years, claiming I had arrest warrants in my name and much worse. So in regards to Terhune's hate blog, over the years he has bullied us mercilessly on that thing, threatened to sue me, writing in capital letters, "Do you think I am bluffing?" He loves to yell in his capital letters and do this in bold red, and continually posting implications that I'm demonic, the devil, and revealing his obsession with Satan and his being some holy warrior. Now, even this past week, Terhune had an image on there calling me the woman from hell. There have been years of threatening bullying pictures of pigs, people laughing at my work, and then recently he changed the theme of the blog using the stock Blogspot theme of bookshelves, with which he tried valiantly to act as if he was using the blog now as a literary critique of my work. I think he has fooled exactly no one in that effort. Perhaps the image he uses on that blog of the books on the shelves, perhaps it represents all the books about Rudolph Valentino he deems unfit for anyone to read. Or maybe they're the books Donna Hill refuses to include on her big list of all Rudolph Valentino books, such as all of our books, all 12 of them now. So without a tiny doubt, the most disturbing element of Terhune's hate blog is that he uses it to provide a platform for David Brett, who leaves his litany of hate and insanity as comments. So this past week, Terhune, before any possibility of having a copy of Baltasar Cué's The True Rudolph Valentino in hand, he posted on May 14th, 2019, and I cite his headline being, "Cheap 10-part installment reprint article passed off as true biography of Valentino book. It's fake news. Rudy no doubt met Cué and was interviewed, just as he did with many other journalists, including Margaret Mitchell. But I think it's highly unlikely, as well as next to impossible, that at that very busy point in his life, 1926, that the just-turned 31-year-old Valentino was setting out to write the story of his life. Zumaya lays laurels at the feet of Baltasar Cué, saying he was living at Falcon Lair, working feverishly in the office while Rudy was traveling, promoting Son of the Sheik. His work with Rudy was to counter all the lies about Valentino, says Zumaya. What lies? Outside the Pink Powder Puff article, which was at this point unwritten, what lies would Valentino be trying to dispel? None. She just made this all up to fit the narrative that Valentino and Cué were collaborating. End quote. Now, I want to inform Tracy Trujillo of the following about this book by Cué, as apparently he knows nothing about Cué. I remind him to listen again to Janine Villalobos' praise, recommendation, and endorsement of the book, which she included in her dissertation, and read Alberto Guglielmi's letter of complete and enthusiastic endorsement. Tracy Terhune is basically calling Janine Villalobos a liar and discrediting her dissertation. It seems incredulous that Terhune appears to be claiming now that everyone is lying. That would be from Alberto Guglielmi to Janine Villalobos to Baltasar Cué to you and I, Renato. And Terhune is doing this, accusing everyone of lying and that we're fabricating this book's content just to satisfy his own perception of Rudolph Valentino. And of course, David Brett added his sickening commentary on all of this week, and I will just say that what that man writes does not deserve commentary, as it is so false and absurd. And there is a larger issue here now to point out. How can Tracy Terhune and Simon Constable be considered authorities on Valentino or even reputable people when they openly affiliate with David Brett? And today I intend to document my reason for that last question by exposing just what David Brett has done to the legacy of Rudolph Valentino. Now, I know people have seen the video of the speech I delivered here in Turin in 2009. It is linked on my websites, by the way. But I spent 5 minutes in that speech vetting David Brett's lousy book on Rudolph Valentino. I have been under his attack ever since. And the nature of those attacks is what makes me question Tracy Terhune and Simon Constable's affiliation with this man. So in 2014, I filed a lawsuit here in Italy against David Brett. We did. And we sued him for defamation under his legal name, which is not David Brett, by the way. And it's not Albert Morris or any of the other many aliases he's used online over the years. But I won the lawsuit in 2016. And I am asked often, how's that going? I will say it is going, and far from over. And I will add that legal cases between countries are not easily resolved. The wheels of international justice turn very slowly indeed. But that David Brett owes me 35,000 euros, plus interest accruing, and has been ordered to remove everything he has ever posted about me or us online. He has yet to do so. He was also ordered by the court to post the entire verdict, translated in English and certified by the court on his website, and is also ordered by the court decree not to post anything about me now. He is wildly violating this court order at the time with his vile commentary on Tracy Terhune's blog and his eager communications with Simon Constable. And I read from the verdict, and I quote, "The Court of Asti, issuing the final ruling, ascertains the offending nature of behavior, subject matter of the proceedings put in place by the defendant, a.k.a. David Brett, condemns David Brett to compensation in favor of Evelyn Zumaya for damage to her image to the overall extent of 30,000 euros, in addition to legal interests and the date from the date of the judgment until the full settlement. The court orders the defendant, David Brett, to forthwith discontinue and remove all offending material against the works the person, and the professional capacities of the plaintiffs published on the internet or else on paper attributable to the defendant. The court orders David Brett to publish this judgment in the same media venues he used to behave as in the offensive subject of these proceedings, and failing to do so within 90 days, the plaintiff is authorized to carry out the publication at the expense of the defendant." End quote. So today, Tracy Terhune conspires with David Brett, in my opinion, and yes, I have proof of that. I always have. While providing an online platform for him to violate this court order. And in this way, Terhune is acting as an accomplice. I have today, in an effort to expose the heinous level of these people's bullying we have had to endure, I have posted a few important links in the caption of this podcast to a Google Drive archive of the entire case file of the evidence as was submitted to the court in my case against David Brett, as well as the verdict handed down. As I realized Asti is a long trip for most people, I share the court publicly available records of this case. And I say that in all cases, the documents have been officially translated into English, and the screenshot evidence is all in English. The records include the Declaration of Conformity and its translation certifying that every single page was approved by the court as a certified copy. I invite people to go and check out the evidence file from the Court of Asti and realize that this is the bottom line here. These three men are affiliates and openly exchange links and commentary. This is who they are. And I assure David Brett that every single page of this evidence has the court's seal and watermark, and that every page is now public record. And I want David Brett to know that he had every right to view this file from the day I handed it to the judge. As I read before, the court ruled that if David Brett did not post the verdict on his website within 90 days of the issuing of this verdict, we could then post it. Well, we waited a very long time to do so, but it is here today. I feel we gave him plenty of time to comply and figure this out. I add that as of today, David Brett has not even bothered to go to Asti and pull these records, which have been available to him for years, not only to me and to us, but to him as the defendant in the case. Now, instead of responding to the case filed against him, he chose instead to attack our attorneys, try to have me deported, and to ignore the summons, which he most certainly did receive. He has since and continues to mock the case, claiming it never existed, and crowing online about my fake lawsuit. It most certainly was not, and he knows that. He certainly tells a different story to our lawyer in the UK. He has mocked it until now because the payment is due. And he has been ordered to remove all references to me, my friends and business associates, and my work from the internet. Now, these documents, I add, are not protected by any copyright as a result of their being publicly archived and public court record. And may I add to David Brett, in regards to your continued bullying me by claiming I'm homophobic, do shut up. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. It does not matter how many times David Brett says that. He cannot make me who I am not. I am not homophobic, and I think the real homophobia is Brett, appropriating this subject to distort and sensationalize dead people's life stories. And he's been doing it for years, while claiming he has some secret documentation, which he never presents. He is the king of authoritative lying, and the worst offender in representing innuendo as truth. And all in all, as he yells homophobic to anyone who he perceives as an enemy, in the decades he's been claiming Valentino was gay, he has yet to produce a shredded documentation or a single credible account. And by the way, which I asked him for this over a decade ago now, to prove that this was in any way true. And my saying that does not make me homophobic, it makes me an honest historian. When everyone in Rudolph Valentino's world who were there say emphatically this was not his truth at all, Well, I think they're more credible than a porn fiction writer who is out to prove his lame theories to make his fame and, I guess, apparent lack of fortune. I say it's time for David Brett to pack up his I have secret documentation in your homophobic show and go home, because it's over. Now, Renato, as you know only too well, since the moment I reported my discovery of the case file of Rudolph Valentino's court records, from the moment I announced I was interviewing both the families of George Ullman and the fabulous godfather Frank Manillo, from the moment I announced Affairs Valentino, I've been and still am brutally attacked, and we still are. I brought forth evidence of a cover-up, of a family's vendetta, and this was not going to be tolerated at all by this merry band of haters and their chirping sycophants. So for years, they have attacked anyone who supported me and threatened to attack my family members. So now they're attacking only people whose stories I first brought forward. So I guess if logic follows, if I reveal someone as a hero, no matter how much proof as documentation I have in hand to support what I write, they attack them. And vice versa, if I declare someone a scoundrel, they rush to claim they're a hero. They really are the villagers with torches. I think that every moment they spend purporting Frank Manillo and George Ullman were anything less than heroic and honorable. Simon Constable, Tracy Terhune, and David Brett, they defame Rudolph Valentino himself. They perpetuate the same abuse he was suffering from when he died. It is disgusting and heartbreaking for me that I even have to respond to this at all at this point. But it is far more disgusting that these people are still at it, churning out this destruction, this fake news, and preventing wonderful people, trusting people from learning the truth and reading the books with these people's authorized histories. I know they have long claimed that my defense of my work and myself has been bullying them. It is not and never has been. Terhune likes to point to an image he has of fat file folders with the names of the various blogs I ran over the years, scrolled in dramatic black letters across the front of each folder. And I tell him, go ahead and publish those blogs. Please do. Because it is me defending myself, trying desperately to salvage my work, my livelihood, against his orchestrated attacks in bold red letters. He deceives people into thinking those folders contain something else. I assure you that in those folders I say the same things I am saying today. These people are guilty of the very same behavior that drove Rudolph Valentino to his early grave and that inspired him to work with Baltasar Cué and write the True Rudolph Valentino. You know that drawer where Rudolph Valentino kept all the hate pieces against him, which he gave to Cué? I would say that all of this garbage by Tracy Terhune, David Brett, and Simon Constable, all of it would be in there too. Constable seems to want to appear a researcher and scholarly, but his hatred and spite seep through and leaves him revealed for who he really is. His motive is apparent in every word. And even he issued his warnings that his next piece would be on Ullman, and, quote, it would be even longer. Now, you know when you, Renato, sent a request to join Simon Constable's forum, a genuine one, he wrote back. He said that your fame preceded you. And when you asked for an explanation, he told you that if you didn't go away, he would report you to Facebook for harassment. Then he did tell you to go away.
Yes, it is.
It's so rude and unnecessary.
Yes.
But you know, the worst of it for me today is that through the outrageous lies and innuendo of Terhune, Brett, and Constable, they commit their ultimate offense against Rudolph Valentino himself. They portray him as a weak-willed, vapid victim, an utterly clueless man, wandering helpless through his life, as the hapless victim, I guess, of everyone, while living a life in the closet and making all possible poor choices in friends, lovers, and business associates. So I call this out today as a direct abuse of Rudolph Valentino's good name and a gross fictionalization of his fine legacy, and add that this is precisely what drove him to die in anguish and die far too early. And I include in this gross fictionalization by these three the legacies of both Frank Manillo and George Ullman. And I ask people to appreciate these men's great contributions to the life and success of Rudolph Valentino. George Ullman, with his documented success in Valentino's financial recovery and his successful last films made just prior to his death. George Ullman's successful management of the Valentino estate and his heroic restraint during the 30 years he was mercilessly pursued in a collection process which should never have occurred. And Frank Manillo, with his tender moments, cradling Rudolph Valentino as he died, hearing his final words whispered in his ear. Recognize that these haters are still killing Rudolph Valentino's legacy by impugning and polluting with lies and a false narrative, and with their persecution and bullying of people doing research and discovering new things about Valentino, and people like us publishing books. In Baltasar Cué's book, The True Rudolph Valentino, he writes about those friends observing Valentino's anguish in the weeks and days before his death. And I will excerpt page 129. And I quote, St. Clair also told me, and this was confirmed by those who were with Rudolph in New York in those days, that the offensive article in the Tribune, which represented him so unfairly as effeminate, contributed to his troubled state of mind. Rudolph was constantly worried that the accusation could become a permanent part of his legacy. At every moment, when least expected, he would utter some phrase relating to that unmotivated injustice and its author. While his companions talked about other things, he remained thoughtful, and suddenly, as if coming to a conclusion after some intimate reasoning, he surprised people with saying something like, "Yes, I have to break his nose for that." He, Rudolph, who was so virile, and who was deservedly respected for his virility in all the world, had to suffer the unspeakable in being represented as something he himself truly hated. Throughout those days, according to those who were with him at the time, after commenting on the unforgettable offense, he used to place his hand on his stomach and complain of pain, and the unpleasant accusation was constantly being repeated wherever he went. His friends jokingly asking him, "How about the pink powder puffs?" Although he tried to pretend he was enjoying the joke, his disgust grew stronger and corroded his insides. End quote. Now, in closing today, I want to encourage people to read the Cué book and Affairs Valentino and all of our great stories, which we are so eager to share. I also hope they will check out my Amazon authors page, because after 10 years, I finally added something there, including an actual picture of myself. So I know you took that 9 years ago, but I'm as vain as the next one. But, of course, David Brett had to comment on that picture this week, saying, and I quote, that she has a death stare which oozes hatred that I have been touting for the past 2 decades. And Terjun had to call you again, Child Star 73.
Oh, I hope to reach my 73 later in this year. Yes.
We do. Now, in closing this episode today, I'm going to address Tracy Terjun directly. And I say this to him, that your cheap, vicious attacks and bullying name-calling of my husband will not be tolerated. I will respond. My responses are not me oozing hate, but my frustration that you continue with these deplorable actions year after year. Your name-calling makes it wildly apparent how totally outclassed you are by this elegant gentleman sitting here by me today. Tracy Terjun, your jealousy and rage precedes you. I watched as Renato worked for hours, months, on the Baltasar Cué translation, sometimes with 2 computer screens open and often chatting with a linguist in Buenos Aires or a professor in Santiago de Chile. And it was so great was Renato's concentration before the 2 files he was always working on that I knew pretty quickly not to interrupt. Sometimes I could not speak to my husband for 5 or 6 hours at a time. So this incredible labor of love means the world, and it should to anyone interested in Rudolph Valentino. Which brings me to this point, Terjun. your shitty attempt to bully and knock down Renato and my work on this new and quite fabulous book, which is Rudolph Valentino's book, reveals, first of all, that you knew nothing about this, that you knew nothing about Cué, and still know nothing about the prestigious and internationally known movie periodical Cine Mundial, and that you apparently have never read Janine Villalobos' dissertation, and you have no clue what a translation is by calling it a reprint. Now, if reprints were something with which to disparage someone, then I could say the same to you about your book. The True Rudolph Valentino, Tracy Terhune, is not just a reprint. It is a complete and beautifully done translation from one language to another. So maybe you and Janine Villalobos will want to chat. Get your story straight about whether Cué's book was, as she described it, as being, quote, remarkable, and that it represents the true Rudolph Valentino, or is it as you described it, Tracy, as being, quote, a cheap 10-part installation reprint article passed off as a true biography of Valentino? And maybe, just maybe, if you are a legit book reviewer, as you claim you are, you might want to wait until you have the actual book in hand for 1 minute before you write a fake review trashing it based on lies. And maybe you should read Affairs Valentino to learn more about the actual affairs of Valentino. And I'm going to say this, with each cruel hate post you write about us and our new book in the future, you will only sink to an even lower low. And in my opinion, but what after you wrote about his book and our work publishing it, I think Rudolph Valentino would have a lot to say to you.
I think he would be waiting for you, Tracy, on the roof of the Ambassador Hotel with boxing gloves on.
No.
Evelyn, don't worry about me. I feel very proud of the translation and of myself, and I'm happy to now be sharing this great book with all the Valentino enthusiasts.
And I want to thank everyone who supports us, who write in and take the time to extend their support for us, who read the books, and who have wonderful, intelligent discussions. You are so greatly appreciated.
So, we close today again by announcing the book The True Rudolph Valentino by Baltasar Fernández Cué is on Amazon, and I'm sure you will enjoy it as with all the other books we have put together. And please spread the good word that is finally available. Thank you. And as the usual, Fiat Justitia, Ruat Celum. And for the good guys, arrivederci.